Hello everybody, I'm Kathy Drew from Gina's Bernina Sewing Center, and today I'm going to be working with the number 16 gathering foot that Bernina has created for us, and I'll be using it on my wonderful Bernina 880 Plus. So let's talk just a little bit about the presser foot, and I'm going to zoom in so maybe you can see it just a little bit better. The number 16 is available in two sizes. They call it the narrow gathering foot, and then they also have the wide gathering foot. Now, the wide gathering foot is primarily made for those Bernina machines that have the 9mm stitch width capability. And then the narrow foot is, of course, for our 5.5mm machines as well. They both work identically, and they're very easy to use. Now, you primarily want to gather fabric with this foot when the fabric is light to medium weight. And how the presser foot works, you do have some options of determining how much gathering is put into your piece of fabric. So let me talk just a little bit about that, and then I'll actually sew a little with the presser foot and let you see how fabulous this presser foot works. I've done 3 samples for you to look at, and I'm going to talk to you about how we achieved the amount of gathering in each one of these samples. Now, these fabrics were cut the identical length. They're all the same length. But if you look at them, you can see that on one of the samples, it has gathered it less. Then the next sample, a little more. And then we have the very tight gather. And all 3 of these samples, like I said, were cut the same length. So how did I achieve those different amounts of gathering in the sample? It's all by combining your stitch length and your needle tension on your needle thread. Now, the first sample that has fewer gathers in it, and I hope you can see that, I gathered it using our simple straight stitch, and I had a stitch length of 3.0. That's all I did, and this is the amount of gathering that I achieved with a 3.0 stitch length on my straight stitch. The next sample, which has gathered a little bit more, if we compare the two together, you can see there's a little bit more gathers. This was done at a 5.0 stitch length. So a longer stitch length puts more gathers in the fabric. The final sample that I stitched up for you is at a 6.0 stitch length, and I increased my needle tension to 7. And that put a far greater amount of gathers into that piece of fabric. So the formula is more length on the stitch, more tension on the needle thread, and you achieve more gathers in the fabric. So what we're going to do is take a strip of fabric, put our presser foot on, and we're going to do some gathering for you this morning. And this is a batiste fabric, so I would kind of classify it as a lightweight fabric. And like I said, this foot does the best job on light to medium weight fabric. So I used it a tremendous amount when I was sewing for my girls. But it's also good for some of the home deck fabrics. You can even, like our quilting cottons, you can get some gathers in that as well. It does not have a slit in the foot for you to pass your thread through. So once again, we're going to very carefully slide the opening of the foot where the needle travels up the needle, reach under the foot and to the back of the needle, and pull our needle thread down. I'm going to I'm going to clear out the settings that I used before, and then I'm going to set it to a stitch length. Let's go maybe about 5. We'll see how we like it. Okay. Now the fabric that you actually want the gathers on, or that you want to be gathered, goes directly underneath the presser foot. When it takes the first 2 or 3 stitches, you may not see a lot of gathering take place. But after those first 2 or 3 stitches, you're going to see the magic happen. And as always, I hold my needle thread until I take a few stitches. And there is how easily you can gather a piece of fabric. So the first thing that you want to do is experiment with your fabric to determine the amount of gathering that you want to see in that fabric. That is beautiful, isn't it? And now we're going to turn and we're going to gather it on the other side so that we can have the effect of shearing. And if you are familiar with French machine sewing, we used to call this puffing, where the fabric would puff up. And to do that, using the same settings on your machine, we're simply going to gather the other side. Now what you have to be careful of when you're using this presser foot is that you aren't very heavy-handed with how you handle your fabric. The weight of your hand can affect the amount of gathering, so you want to have a very light touch on your fabric as you're doing your gathering. Let's go on around and do this other side. I love working with this foot. It's like magic. If you've ever had to sit and hand pull a thread to gather it up, you know how difficult that can be. And if you're trying to gather it on both sides to create the shearing effect or the puffing, then it's even more difficult. And that's how easy it was. So you've seen this a lot, I'm sure, if you've done heirloom sewing in the puffing. And then also on pillows. Sometimes you'll see this effect on the side of a pillow, a thick pillow. So isn't that beautiful? Now this foot also enables you to gather and attach at the same time. So let me talk to you a little bit. If you have a piece of fabric that you're wanting to attach and gather to, you have to have kind of a formula as to how much fabric you need to fit into this area. So what you want to do is use the settings on your machine to determine the amount of gather you want in that fabric. Once you get those settings made, take about a 12-inch piece of that fabric, run it through, and see how much it gathers the fabric down to. So if it was 12 inches and it gathered it down to, let's say, 6 inches, then you would need twice as much fabric to fit in that given area. If it gathered it down to 4 inches, you would need 3 times as much. So that's basically the math you use. Now, I haven't cut this to any desired length. I just basically want to be able to show you how you can gather and attach at the same time. I'm going to place the fabric, as always, beneath the presser foot. And what I try to do is add a little extra seam allowance to the fabric that I want to gather. Then that way, when I insert the fabric that I'm going to gather it to into the presser foot, I can keep an eye on this piece of fabric as I'm working. Okay? So I'm going to slide this piece of fabric into the slit that is in this presser foot. Now what that does is it simply protects the fabric that we are attaching the ruffle to from the feed dogs of the machine. And in doing so, that prevents the fabric from gathering. Now if I were actually making an item, this would actually be positioned right sides together. The fabric that I'm attaching it to would be right side down onto the right side of the actual ruffle that we're going to make. And I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so maybe you can see a little bit better how that is. So the fabric that we are going to gather is underneath the presser foot. The fabric we're going to attach it to is in the slit of the presser foot, and the two of them are positioned right sides together. I'm going to take just a few stitches to get myself started. And what I like to do is hold the two pieces in my hands. I will keep the piece that I'm attaching the ruffle to in my left hand, and I will kind of guide the ruffle on the right. So can you kind of see why I like to have a little bit more seam allowance on the piece that I'm going to gather? That way I can see it better. If I had them both the same, that bottom piece might, you know, move left to right without me seeing it. And you're going to find that the bottom layer is going to feed faster, so don't let that frighten you. That's what's supposed to happen. And you just keep your eye right there on the presser foot, right here, making sure you keep this fabric into the foot in the curve of it, and then let this piece extend beyond. And I am gathering and attaching as I sew. I'm getting pretty close. I just kind of eyeball that fabric. But like I said, you would use that formula to make sure that when you stitched it, it would come out with the amount you needed. And there you can see a beautiful ruffled piece that's been attached. I think it's wonderful. One of the best feet I ever purchased, and I think you would enjoy using it. Now, if you should decide that you need this presser foot, you can always call the shop. Area code 865-966-5941. Or you can visit us on ginasbernina.com or send an email, info@ginasbernina.com, and we'll be glad to help you any way we can. If you have a dealer in your area, I'm sure they carry this presser foot. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have any questions, you know how to contact us. Thank you so much, and you have a great day.